Hi, welcome to another episode of my entirely visual method of restoring optical film soundtracks. If you're remotely observant, then you've probably surmised by this point that my process can restore 16mm optical tracks. Rather than show you how good a 16mm track can sound, I want to show you how a bad 16mm optical track will sound in optimal circumstances. From that point on, if a second restoration is desired, others can decide what they'd like to do with the WAV file that results from my work. I think it's important for us to ground ourselves in the reality of the limitations of an optical track. As I've stated before, it is possible to achieve these limits with a 2K overscan of a composite print. The point of what I'm doing here is to preserve an optical track accurately with as few physical blemishes as possible. Just the waveform made by the printer in its purest form. This will be of interest to two different groups that may or may not overlap. Institutions interested in preserving exactly what was printed and heard, and institutions that don't have the budget or interest in going further, with a second pass consisting of traditional audio restoration, removing perceived blemishes that are baked into the optical track. There's nothing necessarily wrong with going beyond the scope of what I'm doing. It all depends on what your philosophy or ethics, or whatever your intentions are. I'm just offering my process as a basis for clearly defining an endpoint of a first pass at restoring a film's audio from an optical track source. The physical cleanup that I do is the first pass, and anything beyond that is a second pass. In plenty of cases, this may be all that is necessary or desired. But only once we reach that point, a fully visually cleaned optical track, can we know what is baked into the track. And from that point on, we can decide thus far no further, or we can decide to do some traditional restoration on the WAV files that come out of my work. My case study for this video is a restoration of an optical track from a scan of a 16mm composite print. For visual learners, please view part 1 of this series to get an understanding of what my restoration method entails. One of the benefits of putting my process through the most rigorous tests imaginable over the course of a year is that it applies pretty much identically to any bilateral variable area track, with few modifications. The principle is always the same. Correct the exposure, or gamma, or what have you, horizontally stabilize the track, visually flip the track on top of itself in different ways with different blend layers, while at the same time maxing the contrast to pure black and white, and then manually restore the rest of the blemishes. There are untold numbers of scans of composite prints that can be subjected to my technique, and I guarantee to you the results of my technique would impress, even on some of the crummier optical tracks out there. All I'm doing is taking the most complex image that it is possible to completely know, a symmetrical black and white waveform, and subjecting it to some very simple, well-understood image processing. Without getting too philosophical, if restoring a standard photographic, color, or even grayscale image is like caring for a living being, then visually restoring an optical track is like caring for automata. The basic principles of my method originate strictly from a priori assumptions about the visual appearance of bilateral tracks. These are assumptions that someone who's never heard of an optical track or never restored audio before can make. The assumptions are that this track type looks like a simple waveform, that both sides contain identical information, that adjusting the image parameters changes the audio result, and that you can ultimately reach a point of diminishing returns. It doesn't matter what the waveform was printed on. It doesn't matter how complex or simple the audio signal is. We don't have to learn about the history of optical tracks. We don't need to read thousands of pages of engineering documents explaining how the original technology worked. We don't need any esoteric, forbidden knowledge that only an expert with decades of experience of restoring audio would know. The conclusion one reaches from this is that you can restore an optical track with only some knowledge of image processing, or that someone could technically restore an optical track extremely proficiently without listening to the results, and I think that is both helpful and interesting. Hypothetically, a variable density track would require an even simpler method, because there would be no waveform to stabilize. My stabilization uses a very simple algorithm in Blackmagic Fusion, but it's still the most time-intensive rendering procedure as part of my technique. If you'd like to see me do a case study about variable density tracks, please send me a ProRes 2K overscan of one. My contact information is below in the description. Currently, I don't have any variable density tracks at my disposal. You could help me and I'd appreciate it. But this is all getting beside the point. The point here is we're talking about a suboptimal 16mm optical track that I restored optimally. What does that look and sound like? Well, let's first see and hear it without restoration. For the rest of this video, if you haven't already, I recommend wearing headphones from this point on. Note that although the following is unrestored, I still extracted its audio from the picture scan just to make the comparison apples to apples. I don't have a capture of the track through any other means anyhow.
What happened?
I wanted to talk to you about something.
Talk?
Yes. Oka killed my brother a long time ago.
Got any proof?
Just this.
I
recorded everything they said at the house, just in case.
You're quite a girl, aren't you? You're sure everything's on this tape?
It doesn't say exactly, but...
It's no good, then.
But he had me locked in the room all day.
No good. You could have made up any story.
He's also got a suitcase full of guns, too.
What?
The following is the same track as restored by my method.
What happened?
I wanted to talk to you about something.
Talk?
Yes. Oka killed my brother a long time ago.
Got any proof?
Just this. I recorded everything they said at the house, just in case.
You're quite a girl, aren't you? You're sure everything's on this tape?
It doesn't say exactly, but...
It's no good, then.
But he had me locked in the room all day.
No good. You could have made up any story.
He's also got a suitcase full of guns, too.
What?
I'm going to replay one brief section, first unrestored and then restored, and please remember that in the restored version, you're hearing an optical track that has had every physical blemish removed, leaving only the squiggly line underneath.
Got any proof? Got any proof?
One thing you should be able to notice, other than the massive amount of crackle that's been removed, is that some crackle actually remains. This is crackle that is visible in the original squiggly line itself. Now, why is that? We can assume that this optical track might have been re-recorded from another optical track. This also seems evident from the particularly low fidelity of the track. Now, if we want to be particularly conservative or hands-off, we now have a way to preserve this 16mm optical track with all its inherent deficiencies. This is a defensible position. We're doing no harm by keeping the baked-in crackle. We're preserving signal that was heard in every print struck from the same track negative. However, if one wants to go through with removing what all is perceived to be crackle on the previous generation's material, or further enhance the signal in whatever way is desired, that can be done. If one wants to do that, then what I've created here is a great starting point for that, because such a person's cleanup job would be made much easier in light of the fact they'd only be restoring a minute bit of crackle, compared to what I started with before in my method. Thanks for watching. Happy holidays. Have a good night, afternoon, morning, whatever time it is where you are.